Forget beautiful green grass, stadium lights, and referees. To find the very first domino of the world's biggest sport, we have to go back 700 years to England. Back then, football was a literal riot. This was mob football. It was played between rival villages on holidays. The rules? There were not any. The ball? An inflated pig's bladder. Hundreds of men ran, kicked, punched, and wrestled through rivers and over fences. The goal? Get that ball to the balcony of the neighboring village's church, even if it was 3 miles away. It caused so much damage that the King of England banned it in 1314. He called it a noisy public nuisance. But you can't stop people from playing. The game survived secretly for centuries. And its survival sets up domino number 1, the birth of modern factories and schools. By the early 1800s, the richest families in England sent their sons to elite boarding schools. These teenage boys brought their wild village football games with them. But the schools had a massive problem. The games were causing actual riots on campus. One of the school headmaster thought,
"We need to calm these boys down. If we change this wild game into a disciplined sport, we can teach them teamwork, leadership, and good manners."
The schools realized that if they wanted to play against each other, they needed a single set of rules. But every school argued that their way was best. One school played on hard brick courtyards, so they banned tackling and focused on neat footwork. Another school had huge muddy fields. They decided it was totally fine to pick up the ball and run with it and even kick opponents in the shins. October 26, 1863, London. Managers and captains from different teams meet at a pub called the Freemasons' Tavern. Their goal? Create one official rule book for everyone. They meet 6 times and argue furiously. The biggest argument was, can you use your hands? And can you kick people in the shins? Mr. Morley, who wants no violence, said,
"If we keep kicking each other's shins, grown-up men will never play this game. We must ban hands and ban shin kicking if we want the world to accept this sport."
Mr. Campbell, who wants a rough game, said,
"Sir, you are destroying the bravery of the game. If you take out the roughness, you take out the courage, and I am leaving."
Campbell walks out. His followers follow him. The split is permanent. The group that wanted running and tackling created rugby. The group that voted to ban hands and shin kicking created the Football Association. They called their game Association Football. Because Association Football was too long to say, college students shortened the word association to ASOC. And eventually it became the word soccer. The rules were now set. Hands were banned. By making the game simpler and safer, these men unknowingly set off a massive chain reaction. The game was now cheap, easy, and ready to be hijacked by the people who would make it famous, the working class. In the 1870s, football was still a game for rich snobs. Wealthy doctors and lawyers dominated the tournaments because they had the free time and the money to play for fun. Then came the next big domino, a new factory law in 1874. This law forced factories to let workers go home early on Saturdays at 2 p.m. For the first time ever, regular workers had a free weekend afternoon. But factory bosses and church leaders worried the men would just go to the pubs and get drunk, so they decided to start football teams for them. Suddenly, factory workers across England started their own clubs. Railroad workers started a team that became Manchester United. Weapon factory workers started a team that became Arsenal. A local church started a team to keep young men out of gangs, which became Manchester City. But these factory workers had a problem. They were smaller and tired from working 60 hours a week. When they played the rich athletic students, they got physically crushed. The rich players used a hog the ball style, where one big guy running forward while everyone else pushed behind him. Workers could not win that way. They needed a secret weapon. They found it in Scotland. Upon in Scotland, a team had figured out a radical new trick. Because their players were smaller, they realized that kicking the ball to a teammate was faster than running with it. They invented the passing game. In 1883, a team of working class iron weavers and plumbers made it to the big cup final against the rich champions. The workers had secretly learned the Scottish passing style. The rich players laughed at them. They thought passing the ball was cowardly. But during the game, the rich players grew exhausted running in circles. The workers moved the ball from side to side, making the defenders chase them. The workers won by 2-1. The rich elite would never dominate football again. The working class had taken over the sport. The factory teams were winning, but the players were poor. They could not afford to take days off work to travel for games. So, clubs started secretly paying them under the table. This was strictly illegal at that time. When the football bosses threatened to ban the working class teams, the teams threatened to leave and start their own competition. Realizing they would lose all their fans and money, the bosses gave in. In 1885, paying players became legal. Football was no longer just a hobby, it was a business. And British trade ships were about to take this business to the entire world. By the late 1800s, Britain was the richest trading country on earth. Wherever British ships and money went, British workers followed. And in their bags, they packed leather footballs. This is the global trade domino effect. The British did not mean to teach the world football. They just played it on their docks and train yards because they were homesick. But the local people watched through the fences completely hooked. Take Buenos Aires, Argentina. British workers were building the country's new railroads. When they started playing football, the locals laughed and called it the game of the crazy Englishman. But the local kids quickly realized something awesome. You don't need money to play this game. You just need a ball. Over in Brazil, a young man named Charles Miller came home from school in England in 1894. He stepped off the boat holding 2 footballs and a rule book. He said his dad, "Look dad, I brought home a degree in football. Brazil is going to love this game." The game spread like wildfire through the poor neighborhoods of Brazil. Because early clubs were racist and would not let black players play, poor Afro-Brazilian players developed a completely new style to protect themselves. They used dance moves, rhythm, and trickery to dodge tackles without getting hurt. This beautiful creative style would eventually change the world. At the exact same time, British sailors docking in France introduced the game to the French. British students in Switzerland spread it to the European universities. In Spain, British miners started the country's very first team. Shortly after, a Swiss man placed an ad in a newspaper in Spain looking for people who wanted to play football. That tiny newspaper ad created FC Barcelona. Everywhere the British left a ball, a giant club grew. But a massive political problem was brewing. Britain created the game, but they were snobs about it. They thought the rest of the world was not good enough and refused to play against foreign teams. The dominoes were now falling out of Britain's control. European countries wanted a big international tournament, but Britain refused to help. Frustrated by this, a group of European sports leaders realized that if they wanted a truly global game, they would have to build it themselves and leave the creators behind. May 21, 1904. In a small back room in Paris, France, 7 men from 7 different European countries gather secretly. The main country missing was England. Robert Guerin said,
The English think they own this sport, but football belongs to the world now. If they won't lead, we will.
That afternoon, they signed a paper creating FIFA. At first, they were small and had no money. Then, the biggest domino of all fell. World War I. The war changed everything. The same young men who played football against each other were now forced to fight each other in the mud. But even in the horror of war, the power of the game broke through. On Christmas Day in 1914, soldiers on both sides declared a temporary truce. They walked out into the middle of the battlefield, exchanged small gifts, and played a friendly game of football in the snow. When the war ended in 1918, Europe was ruined and broke. FIFA was about to collapse. But a new leader stepped up, a Frenchman named Jules Rimet. Jules Rimet believed football could bring enemies together and heal the world. He wanted a true world championship where the absolute best players could compete. He called it the World Cup. But who would host it? Europe had no money. A small country in South America stepped up, Uruguay. They offered to build a brand new stadium and pay for every single team's travel and hotels. Then, the Great Depression of 1929 hit. The global economy crashed. European teams panicked and said it was too far and too expensive to travel across the ocean by boat. Jules Rimet literally begged them. He managed to get 4 European teams to board a single cruise ship. Inside his suitcase, Jules Rimet hid the solid gold World Cup trophy. They sailed across the Atlantic Ocean, straight into the history books. July 13, 1930. It's winter in South America and snow is falling in Uruguay. France plays Mexico in the very first World Cup match. A French player scores a beautiful goal, and the tournament instantly becomes a massive, wild success. The stadium is packed, and national pride is through the roof. The grand final comes down to a fierce neighborhood rivalry, Uruguay versus Argentina. Tens of thousands of Argentine fans pack onto ships to cross the river, screaming victory or death. The crowd is so angry, intense that the referee demands a fast getaway boat to be waiting for him at the docks in case of riot breaks out. The teams even fight over the match ball. Argentina wants to use their ball. Uruguay wants theirs. The referee makes a funny compromise. Argentina gets to use their ball in the first half, and Uruguay gets to use theirs in the second half. First half, Argentina plays great and leads by 2-1. Second half, Uruguay dominates, scores 3 goals, and wins by 4-2. The entire country of Uruguay goes crazy celebrating. In Argentina, angry fans throw stones at the Uruguayan embassy. The World Cup proved that football was no longer just a game, it was a war without weapons. The success of that first tournament knocked over the final, unstoppable row of modern dominoes. Powerful dictators realized they could use football to make themselves look good on the world stage. In 1954, the World Cup was broadcast on television for the first time. Suddenly, billions of people could watch icons like Pele and Maradona live from their own couches. Giant companies realized that football fans are the most loyal customers on earth, turning FIFA into multi-billion-dollar empire. Today, over half the people on the planet Earth are football fans. A simple game played with nothing but your feet and a ball conquered the globe. And it all happened because a king tried and failed to stop a village game.